Hey everybody, welcome back to Little Things Are Big Things Education Podcast with T Free and K Dub. Excited to continue diving into our big idea with you about eliminating multitasking. Dave helps us with some new language around calling this task switching. We give you some science behind it. We give you a couple of videos to reference, a couple of different guides and tips and thoughts around technology and how that impacts us in our multitasking or the myth of multitasking. And then K-Dub finishes us with an awesome story to send us into summer as we dive into the power of connection once we remove these things that can create the task switching. So let's get to it.
All right, folks, welcome back to littlebiged.com. We are in our multitasking week. T Free's coming to you live from Bowling Green with all of the energy of his golden retrievers. 3 years of challenge day, lots of years teaching, and still doing math tutoring in his spare time, or I guess we'll call it spare time, but still doing math tutoring one-on-one with those of you who need it. My great friend and an awesome teacher, T Free.
Heyo, and my best bud coming to you live from the globally warmed Pacific Northwest. He doesn't have a whistle around his neck for you today, but he did find a stopwatch close enough with 11 years of teaching middle school and high school social studies, 20 years of coaching anything and everything from spike ball to football. My best bud, K-Dub.
Thanks for listening, folks. We are coming to you from the Peak Stakes Mathematics. Don't forget to rate and review us. We'd love to hear from you at littlebiged.com as well. Give us those 5 stars. And what are we? We're on Spotify, Google, YouTube. Yep. What am I missing?
Stitcher, yeah. Pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast, or just stream us direct from littlebiged.com.
All right, so this week's big idea is the idea of how we can eliminate multitasking. And Tim, I think maybe the best place to start is why we should eliminate multitasking, right? Let's explain our why here. And I think
quite simply put, it's a made-up thing. we can't multitask. Like, there's scientific proof now behind that this is a terrible idea, and it's an excuse for those of us that are getting distracted. Sorry if I offended you. Sorry if you believe that you are a professional multitasker. Yes, we can do multiple things. Yes, we can bounce between items, and the female brain is much more capable of this compared to the male brain. However, multitasking is not a real thing. You are doing one thing, then you're doing the next thing. And some of us are just much better at holding lots of things at once. But science is showing that even the best of us that are bouncing from one to the next are going to perform it at a much slower pace than if we just stayed focused and knocked one item out at a time.
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure I had this open just in case anybody wanted to challenge us on this, because I feel like this is one of those kind of like default phrases that people use and they still don't accept that it's not the case. But the National Institute of Health and the Library of Medicine have a whole bunch of resources, and I just picked one out here that talks about the fact that multitasking is literally something that the human brain is incapable of doing. Like, it has not evolved to do that. It has evolved to not do that for very specific purposes. There's a whole bunch of language on it. And then the term that they use is task switching versus multitasking. And what that article and what you and I are going to talk about is the cost of task switching, right? Because what happens, and you pointed to it, like there is research to show that women are better at this than men are, but like there is a cost to doing the task switching, which kind of the most basic level is just that you do things at a slower rate, right? You're less effective if you're constantly switching from one task to the next.
Right. I mean, like we've talked about this idea of when you get into flow, like you get into like this peak state, right? Where like everything just kind of is there, and the effort level disappears because you're feeling it. You're in that vibe. Like you can't get in flow when you're going from this to this to this to this, back to this to this to this to this, right? Like there is no flow there. It's start and stop, start and stop, start. It's very jittery. I don't know. Like it's just really difficult for our brains, and like you said, like it's not a thing, it's the task switching. And especially for most of our masculine energy and our male brains, like we're really bad at it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm wondering actually, like on that note, to talk about the personal side of this. I'll let you go first. When you're task switching, what have you noticed about the inefficiencies of trying to go through that process for yourself?
For me personally, if I'm in a spot where I find that task switching is like my go-to, like I need to be doing it, I one get very frustrated
Mm,
because I'm not good at it. And I get annoyed that I can't just finish one task. Like if I'm working for 20, 30 minutes and then I get interrupted to take the dogs out because they're whining at the door or something, right? I'm like, yo, hold on 10 minutes, right? And I'm like
mhm,
hoping that and they just keep whining. I'm like, dang it. Okay. So I go take the dogs out or whatever. And then I try to like lock back in to my task I was working on. And I'm like, okay, where was I? Oh, that's right. I was there. Wait, did I type in that formula yet? Okay, let's go look at the formula. Okay, good. That formula is there. All right, perfect. Oh wait. Oh, I wanted to make a video. Dang it. Okay. Like I feel like I just get very scattered and I lose that rhythm and that flow. And then, about 10, 15 minutes in, I start to find my rhythm. I start to find my flow again. And then something else will pop up, right? Like the
mhm.
phone will ring. And actually, I'm really bad about this. You can ask my wife. I put my phone on vibrate and I will ignore my phone because like I will get into a zone and like
Mhm.
I don't hear it. It's on vibrate. Usually it's too far away for me to either feel or hear the buzz, right? And all of a sudden I go back and I've got like 4 text messages and 3 missed calls. I'm like, oh, like, but it's because I'm just not good at getting interrupted and getting back in it. And so we were talking, you and I, even about like having our sleep patterns interrupted, right? And like I can go
Mhm.
back to sleep pretty quick, but I also know that if I can sleep 6, 7 hours straight, that is so much better than if I'm doing 2 hours getting up, 2 hours getting up, two
Mhm.
hours getting up, especially if I'm up long enough that like I had to actually come out of my sleep, like I can get
Yeah.
back in pretty quick, but like if I'm up for a moment and then right back down, like that's different than if I'm like, okay, I went up, I took the dogs out, they went potty, we came back in, I went to sleep. Okay, I got up, I got the dogs breakfast, I had to go back to sleep, and I don't know. I operate so much better when I'm able to do one task to completion and then take a break and then move.
I
And instead of going from task to task. And we talked about that 45-minute rule the other day too. And so like I'm not saying you got to knock out a task in a single sitting, but if I take a break, I come back to that same task in flow still,
hmm.
without having to like jolt my brain and thought processes from like one completely different thing to the next. Like if I do a construction project, a math project, take care of the dogs and then send a couple of emails off on like a construction bid, like so many different places, like I can't keep it all together.
Yeah, like that, and that's where for me I really identify with like I think you used the word frustration at one point there in terms of like I know when I'm working on someone and someone interrupts me while I'm trying, like especially if I'm already in the flow and someone interrupts me, I get really annoyed and it comes
Right.
across like I come across like a complete jackass when that happens
Same.
because I'm so frustrated that you interrupted the flow. And like of course you should know that I'm in flow, or it's just a whole nother communication issue, but like so that's like the first thing. The second thing for me that really stands out is I forget stuff to a really, like I will have an idea that I'm convinced is life altering, and if someone interrupts me or if I lose my flow because I got distracted by whatever it is that distracted me, because I also have ADD, like you that happens, and then like that idea that you thought you would never forget because it's so powerful, completely gone. And 2020 pick them if I'm ever going to remember it again, and make sure that I connect it to the thing that I thought
Right.
was important, which is also very frustrating. But like that, so it's like the forgetfulness, the frustration, and then the other one that I find is I end up being super slow, because for me, if I get interrupted, this is particularly around reading or writing
Right.
tasks. Like if I'm reading something or I'm writing something and I get interrupted in the middle of that flow, I basically have to start all the way over, right? Like I got to basically go back to the beginning of the article and kind of skim for context until I get back to the place that I left off. I can't just pick up like in the middle of a sentence.
Right.
And it's bad enough with the reading. I don't know if bad enough is the right phrasing, but like my wife and I have talked about this. Like she thinks it's kind of funny. Like I cannot stop reading if I don't get to a page that ends with a period or or the end of a chapter, right? Like I can't just stop in the middle of a page. Like,
Yeah.
No. That's not going to work for me. And I think that leads into that idea of like the same thing. Like if I'm in the middle of a task of reading or writing, like if I haven't finished a thought or if I haven't finished reading whatever, like getting to like what I think is an appropriate stopping point, I basically have to start all over again. And so if I'm in a space where I have to get interrupted or where I'm making the choice to get interrupted, which let's be honest, some of this is choices that we make. It takes me forever to get stuff done because I'm constantly starting from point A, even though I've gotten all the way to I've gotten to point R and I'm going all the way back to point A to start all over again because I lost track of where I was.
Right. Distractions in general are one of those things. And I'm going to make a quick request. I know you did it for fun with the stopwatch, but I'm getting distracted because it's totally rubbing on your microphone. So yeah, no, it's so real, right? Like everything can be this quick distraction that pulls us out of a moment, from like a sound to, things moving by, right? Like I'm really bad if I'm sitting at like an open window and I'm like, I watch things go by. Like I can't focus on what it is that I'm supposed to be doing because I want to look out and just like observe whatever's happening around me. I think it's funny you talk about the reading piece because I've gotten to a point where I'm okay with stopping in the middle of a page, but what you spoke to was so true for me too. Like when I go to pick back up, I'm like, oh, that's where I left off. Wait, what happened? So I usually go back almost like a full page to like, oh, that's right. This was leading into blah, 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 blah. And like, I kind of like, it's almost like warming the car back up to get back to speed,
Mm-hmm. So I think where this shows up for our students, we talked about it a little bit in the connection activity with like the devices, right? And how easy it is for them to get their attention pulled away. And one of the things that I always think about when it comes to students getting distracted, and it helps me be less of an angry adult in the room when I'm dealing with these things, is to think about, I know he's a slightly controversial figure. Simon Sinek has a couple of videos, but one in particular called, like if you just look up Simon Sinek and millennials in the workplace, he has this like, I think it's like a 12-minute video where he's literally asked one question and just talks for 20 minutes because that's part of why he's controversial.
That's what he does.
Yeah. But he talks about the reliance that our generation, which is even worse for the generation of the kids that we're teaching, have on being connected to their social media and their technology.
Right.
And what he talks about in that is, and Tim, I think you've seen this as well. You and I have talked about Simon Sinek before.
I've watched a lot of his stuff, and yeah, some of it I think is brilliant, and a lot of it is like tied into the addiction piece of this too, which is
that's what I was going to. Yeah, and that's the thing that I try to hold in my heart as we think about like thinking with our hearts versus our minds from a previous podcast. When I'm trying to redirect a student, is understanding that this isn't a personal thing about me. It's not something, right, like a cognitive decision, right? It's an addiction that these guys have to the social media platforms that they're on and their desire to connect, right? We know that teenagers are completely wired to connect with their friends and the people that they look up to. And the people that they look up to are often on social media now, right? And so they're going to want to be checking in on whatever platform is at the top, right? I know a couple of years ago it was Snapchat. Now it seems like TikTok has kind of taken over. But that's a legitimate thing. Like they do have an addiction, and treating it as such, I think, is like stop one as a teacher is understanding what it is.
Well, I mean, it's designed to be an addiction, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we literally, every single smartphone that continues to come out has more strategic bells and whistles and notifications, right? Like every single platform, every app, every social media has its own unique ding now that lets you know what it is. Or even like when it's on vibrate mode, right? Like you can build custom vibrations so you know that the boo boo is like a certain one versus like you know, like they literally they can program it so that you respond to it just like the good old Mavlov's dogs, right? Like you ring the bell, you start salivating. Like if you take a student's phone away, for if that's something you're allowed to do, and they've earned the right to lose their phone for the day, do yourself a favor in this addiction world. Take a look at them and see how many times they still reach for their phone in their pocket.
Ooh.
Without the phone, and you have it, right? They will reach for that thing out of just a habit to do it, and they will grab their phone if they have their phone when it doesn't vibrate, and they could have swore it did, right? The phantom vibration, right? This is where it's the true addict side of it, right? Like, and again, what you were talking to is we don't necessarily have a regular conversation with our students about how this is actually a drug. This is actually something that we are becoming dependent upon or using as an escape mechanism or a coping mechanism or, you know, everything and anything in between. If you are disciplining a kid by taking it away from them and then giving it back to them at the end, literally all you've done is you've taken their drug away for 30 minutes and you've given it right back to them. Like they're still going to go rip those dopamine hits as soon as you hand it back to them. If they haven't already walked across the room, grabbed their drug off of your countertop and walked away with it. Like that happens all the time in my class, and it's ridiculous. Like, oh, you said I could. Like, no, we didn't. You know we didn't, right? Like there's such this like uncontrollable urge to get there that we don't have the conversation. And because of the constant notifications, because of the constant needing to like and chase the new fad and do the new TikTok dance and all these things that we're trying to do that are pulling at our attention, we're constantly in this not multitasking, right? But what'd you call it again? The task
switching, I think is the term. Yeah.
So the task switching is constant for us all the time. And I think, I don't remember if it was the same video you're talking about, but one of his videos, I know Simon Sinek talks about the idea of both in human behavior in the workplace and with research done on rats, flashing different lights at them and grabbing different attentions all the time, that even once you remove the actual distraction, our brain is still split, even if it's trying to focus on one thing. Like it's a permanent issue. When you've designed it for years, it literally becomes something you can no longer turn off. Like we're always trying to task switch, even when we're only working on one task, because our brain that is developed and like molded into it.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, there's a couple things that you said in there that like it triggered immediate reactions. The phantom like vibrate in the pocket. I remember I've turned off. I only use my phone on volume on or no alerts. And part of the reason for that was I noticed a couple of years ago that I constantly thought I could feel my phone vibrating in my pocket. And so I turned the vibrate function off. I have noticed a dramatic, I can't remember the last time I had a phantom vibrate situation with the phone because I've turned that feature off by choice, where I just don't select it, I should say. So that like immediately struck home. The other thing that struck home immediately, again, like thinking on this on a personal level, and again, like the thing to remind ourselves, I'm trying to speak from a personal thing because I can't speak for my students because I haven't been raised in the same technological context that they have. But when I was born, nobody really knew what the internet was, right? Like AOL was my first introduction to the idea of being on the internet. And I can still remember when you would like open a new window and walk away and go get like bagel bites and then come back because you knew that you were going to get a delay on opening the page. Whereas now it's like if the page doesn't open the second I click it, I'm screaming at my device like, what the hell? So like thinking about like where our kids are coming from in terms of what they're used to having access to is is something that I've just acknowledged that I can't understand that part of it. And even recognizing for my own self, I'll use today as a really good example. We had a really engaging, powerful staff meeting today where we've changed the name of our school to Ida B. Wells Barnett, and this guy Dan Duster, who is her great grandson, was on the call today, just kind of talking about her legacy and what she means to him, and how he's hoping to develop a connection with our school since we've renamed it after this family member of his. Super good storytelling, very interesting, very powerful as it relates to like all these things going on in our world today, like acknowledging that today is the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder, like all of these important things. And I even in those moments could find myself like thinking about and starting to open my phone and then going like, wait a second, I'm not even bored, and putting it down, right? Like your comment about being conditioned to want to switch to the next thing and double check that I didn't miss a text or that I didn't miss a DM or a like on Twitter is a very, very real thing. And that's for me as someone who hasn't had access to this from the day that I was born.
Right. Yeah. You take a lifetime of the technology babysitter, like, and the best of the parents will do it, right? Like I watch my brothers do it. I've watched some of my friends do it. Like they're exhausted and they need a beat to do some self-care. So yeah, iPad for 40 minutes, go, and like I've watched 2-year-olds pull an iPad out that can barely walk, don't have full function of their verbal skills yet, and they are able to tap a device multiple times and pull up a game and just be in a dopamine junkie heaven, like in seconds.
Isn't that one of the most horrifying things you've ever seen? I mean, like, so I have a 2.5-year-old, almost 3-year-old nephew whose parents have been super intentional about limiting screen time. Like this kid has never been on a phone and like barely gets to watch anything on TV. But even he, like if he gets a hold of the device, doesn't take him very long to figure out how to navigate that thing.
Right.
It is. I think the word horrifying is the right word. It is horrifying how quickly they can figure these things out.
Well, because we've built them
And
to
it's
be
not
so
an accident, right?
intuitive. Yeah. They're so intuitive. Every time they do it correctly, they're rewarded. We talk about, we talked Super Mario Effect multiple weeks in a row now. You want to talk about somebody who's getting rewarded for trying without punishment for failing, right? Like, let me push a couple more buttons until all of a sudden, ding, 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 sounds and whistles and bright lights. And like, yeah, like you're going to quickly learn how to pass the initial level of how do I get past the home screen to my actual game, So
for sure. So I think we've done a pretty good job of explaining like how kids get trapped in the multitasking, right? They have all of these things that pull their attention away from, let's be honest, like probably not their most important or most entertaining opportunity in our classrooms or when they're at home doing schoolwork. I think another thing to be aware of is, and this is something that's really easy to lose sight of, I think, they have a lot of stuff going on, right? Like you think about like what the normals are wrong, bad word, what your kind of prototypical teenager is dealing with. In my school, they have 8 classes that they're taking. So they've got 8 different subjects that they're trying to figure out, 8 different schedules in terms of when homework's due, how to navigate the Canvas page in the remote world, when tests are coming up, different expectations in terms of this teacher has cruising altitude. This teacher, if I pull my phone out, is going to like scream at me. This other teacher basically just sits behind their desk and doesn't do anything all day, right? Like they have all these different norms that they're navigating from one class to the next. Then they've got maybe a sport or drama or a club that they're a part of or debate or whatever. They have these other things that they're interested in. And then like, let's not forget they're hormonal teenagers. So they have all of that side of things occupying, like, let's be real, for some of them, the vast majority of their brain energy is dedicated to that particular thought process.
Right.
So like just thinking about all of the task switching that they're already being forced to do, if you just take the technology out of it, right, there's already an enormous amount of things going on. Like I think high school is probably the most, I don't know what the, like it's like the highest saturation point of like the myth of multitasking. Like I feel like high school is the peak of that.
Right, because you're trying to juggle relationships, classwork, extracurriculars, emotions, development. Who am I? The self expressions, all of it. Yeah.
So like those are all the things that like kids are dealing with. Um, and I know you wanted to talk a little bit about like why kids also make the choice to go on the off ramp of like not doing the work. Do you want to talk about that for a little bit? Like the kids who just choose like there's something else going on, and so participating in class is not really a choice I want to make right now.
Yeah, I mean, on the technology side, right? Like if we're going to go back into some of the addiction piece of it, like it's a coping mechanism. It's
Mm-hmm.
the numbing device. It's something that triggers our dopamine, which is our feel good drug. It gives us some of that oxytocin. You you play, yeah, then you combo that right with some of the social media or some of like the words with friends or the Uno where you can play with everybody, and so now not only do you have just the natural bells and whistles of your self enjoyment, now you do have the oxytocin of the connection because you're actually playing or connecting with somebody and likes and comments and all that kind of stuff. Like you're getting fed all these natural drugs that give you that high. And when you're feeling like garbage, or you just failed a test, or you just got scolded in the previous classroom, or mom and dad are pissed off, or they're fighting, or you don't know where your next meal is coming from, or you slept on your friend's couch because X, Y, like all the things that are happening for our teenagers. Absolutely, it makes sense that a go-to for them to escape all the feels is their phone. Like it does everything you could think of another type of drug would do, but it's still keeping you sober, right? Like you're still checking out, you're still dismissing, you're still not actually addressing some of the things that need to be addressed, but it's an acceptable drug, right? Like
Sure. Yeah.
we talk when I was in Challenge Day, we would always talk about different ways of numbing out. Kids would talk about their phones, they'd talk about drugs, they'd talk about alcohol, and we talk about how alcohol is almost one of those acceptable forms as well in our society, right? Like you see beer commercials and liquor commercials all the time, and it's almost like, oh yeah, my dad comes home and he drinks some beers, and that's okay, right? Adults go out on Friday nights to blow off steam, they have a couple glasses of wine, right? Like it's totally acceptable. We accept that is okay, but we tell our kids not to do it because it's illegal and they're not 21 yet, but they're watching our behavior and they model it because they're really good at mimicking us. And then the same thing happens. You take away one and you have another one that's acceptable. They're going to also roll with what's acceptable. And that a lot of times ends up being technology.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think one of the things that highlights that is that Simon Sinek video that we were talking about, or the specific one that I mentioned, the Millennials in the Workplace video. He talks very specifically about the dopamine hits and like gives examples of things. Like one of the examples that I really like is you're at a restaurant with someone having a meal one-on-one and your phone's on the table. And it's like a big deal if your phone vibrates or rings and you don't answer it. Like, oh, I'm so special. Look at me ignoring my phone to maintain eye contact with this human being. And so he talks about all of that. And what's really fascinating I think that's really the right term here, is to see kids. I pretty much usually within the first week of school, if not within the first 2 days, I use that video as a practice for note taking. Mm-hmm. One, because learning how to take notes from a video is a really useful skill because it's really hard, especially for someone who talks as fast as Simon Sinek, and I happen to talk about that fast. That's really helpful. And the message of the video is really powerful. And what the fascinating part about it, and especially as I've shown that video over the course, it's made in 2016, I think, when I looked it up before the podcast. As I've shown that over the last few years, I've noticed the now complete lack of turnaround time on the impact that it has. Kids will immediately acknowledge, yes, it's problematic. Yes, I have an addiction. I totally can identify with all of these things that he said were problematic. And as soon as I've turned in this piece of paper, or before you've even come to my table to collect it, my phone is back out and I'm looking at my phone again. Like they are completely unable or unwilling, and I think unable is the appropriate term, unable to regulate that.
Right.
And
I would agree it's continuing to get worse.
and so like within that and acknowledging that this is a problem, and we're focusing on the technology piece, but I think in general what you and I are talking about is when you are asking kids to task switch. I think what I'm talking about, and I think what you're leaning into is teenagers are busy, right? High school is already a chaotic, hectic time of life. We just talked about all like the laundry list, and we didn't touch on everything, but the laundry list of things that a teenager might be dealing with. And then you add this technology opportunity to distract and to numb out. If you add the expectation that you're going to be doing multiple task switching things within a class period, you are setting your students up for struggle. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say anytime I give my students something that's like, here's what you're going to do for the next 40 minutes. You do this, 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 and this. Go. They're like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, wait, I'm gonna what? And then you're gonna what? And so yeah, like I definitely need to do some of the things we've talked about before with breaking it down, chunking it, scaffolding it, going from level 1 to level 2, being very clear and concise and specific and intentional with my instructions versus you're going to do this for a bit, then we're going to do this, then we're going to come back and pick this up, and then you're going to go do that, and then go record your results and then do this next experiment. And like all the bouncing around is difficult, I've noticed for sure.
Yeah, and I think I touched on this a little bit on Tuesday, but like one of the things I haven't been great about it, and CDL has admittedly screwed me up a little bit or a lot bit, is thinking about not just what I'm asking them to do during work time, but what the expectation during work time is, like in terms of the length, right? Like I'm very intentional that I break up my direct instruction, and I try to make sure that I'm never talking for more than 10 minutes in class. And I feel like if I shoot for 10, I'll sometimes fall back into 15, but because that's the real like line in the sand that I don't want to cross, is I don't want me to be in front of the class for more than 15 minutes at a time, because we know that kids' attention spans will kind of log out at that point.
6 minutes, I think, is where it's at right now.
Okay, so I'm
Something
double,
crazy short.
I'm double where I should be then. So,
Well,
like,
no, where you were 3 years ago was probably 10 to 11 minutes. But in that amount of time, it's literally like chopped down to like 4 to 6 minutes or something crazy.
Yeah, so I got to do a better job of staying on top of that brain science. But like my work time, like I will, like we have block schedules, and it's totally common for me in the past, not so much during CDL, to be like, okay, we were together for 90 minutes doing all the things that we needed to do. You now know what the assignment is. You have 30 minutes to do what you need to do, right? And even if it's one specific task, like a 15-year-old kid can't focus on doing one thing for 30 minutes uninterrupted, right? And so if I don't create the interruption, they're going to choose an interruption. And the likelihood that the interruption that they're going to choose is A, going to be something that I want it to be, and B, going to only be a short interruption and then back to work versus a long interruption and never back to work, are both things that I know I need to be intentional about, right? Like I think there is a fine balance as a teacher between granting kids the freedom to be themselves and feel comfortable in the space that you've created, and not allowing them to fail, right? Not like just like setting them up for failure. Oh, I gave you 30 minutes. The task takes 28. It's on you that you weren't focused for 28 out of the 30 minutes that I set up. Plus, like maybe you're a slower reader or a slower writer or whatever, and you actually needed a little bit more time. So that's one of the things I'm really going to focus on when we go back into in-person learning full time, is really even chunking out the work time to make sure that I'm being intentional about the interruption and then back to work.
So what I think is interesting that I'm kind of picking up from this, and I like where you're going from. I 100% agree with the breakups. And our conversation, right, is around this idea of eliminating multitasking or task switching, because it slows us down when we're in flow. And then this topic of I need to build strategic task switching so that we don't get burned out, so to speak, and our attention span has a moment to reset. And how do we be intentional in our task switching so that it doesn't become back and forth, back and forth, back and forth all the time?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, chunk of dedicated learning, breakup, back to task of dedicated learning, and so like that's an interesting idea because in itself, right, is doing multiple things.
Mm-hmm.
But trying to at least have those 5, 6, 10, 15 minutes of engaged opportunity to get into flow without switching every 10 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever it is that we, what's the, I forget what the current stats are on it now, but like how long each person stays on like even like a song that they like, right, before they skip to the next one. Oh my gosh, that drives me nuts. Just pick a song and stay on it.
Yes, for sure. I am continually astounded by people who don't finish the song that they picked.
Right. That was something you downloaded, put on your playlist, and you still only made it 22 seconds in.
I just like the hook, T-Free. I just like the hook.
And then I tell them, okay, here's your challenge. You're going to go download this free audio software. You're going to go mash up your music, and you're going to build something that just flows naturally for you with 20 to 40 seconds of each song you like. And you'll go through 30 tracks in 4 minutes. Go.
Well, and for me, like legitimately on that thought process of how do we both eliminate the task switching or the myth of multitasking, and how do we manage it for them, is I think like that legitimately. I don't know if you guys use this term. It might be, I can't remember where I got this, but like the idea of taking it from good to great was
That book. It's a good book.
Like I feel like in the modern era, like that is one of, if not the critical element of going from being a good teacher to a great teacher, is how can you balance reducing the amount of task switching that you're asking of your students while also acknowledging short attention span. How do I manage the task switching for them so that the switch from task to task is productive versus non-productive?
Right. And I think that's why I at least lean towards technology in this conversation. Is, to me, the getting yanked in 12 different directions by, in my personal opinion, fairly useless information and apps. like I'm not going into deep dives on these things. And yes, there's those social connections, but like for the most part, when I go and scroll for 40 minutes, there wasn't a lot of value add to that outside of maybe the relaxation or the escape from current stress or whatever it is, right? Like there's not a lot of positive to that outside of just going through the motion and taking that dopamine hit, right? And so going from a task to completion to another task to completion in 4 or 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I think is totally fine. And that's what we're trying to do, right? It's I'm going to start the warm-up problem here. I didn't finish the warm-up problem, but now I'm going to jump into the example problem that we're doing today. Before you finish that, here's what your homework's going to look like. Let's go back and watch a video of somebody else do it. Okay, now finish your warm-up, get caught up, and then do your homework, right? Like doing all of those tasks without completing any of them, I think is going to create a disaster inside of a student's brain. And I know none of us ever intend that, but I have at moments been conscious enough to pay attention to some of my slower lower level students and seeing that's exactly what their day looks like in my classroom. And no wonder they shut down, put their headphones in and quit, because I've destroyed them by jumping from one to one to one to one and only let 80% of my kids actually get into flow.
This is reminding me of our conversation from last week and like translating the idea of task completion to leveling up and and really moving through that flow. And again, the difficulty of being a teacher who's dealing with students who are on levels 1 through 7 in your classroom all at the same time, and seeing the value in that, because tracking is bad, right? Like I'm not at all in favor of tracking and having all the kids at level 7 together and all the kids at level 1 together. Especially if we're doing it the way that we're talking about. Like there's no way to do that from a structural standpoint anyways, because that's fluid to begin with. That was a lot of thinking streamed together real quickly, but like I just think that this gets into how complex our jobs can be as teachers, which leads me to something I don't know if now is like the exact appropriate time to talk about it, but I do want to make sure that you and I talk about teachers are as guilty of struggling with task switching and not completing tasks or not focusing on the thing that they should be focusing on as the students in many cases. And I'm speaking from my own experience. I'm not calling anybody out. I know that this is a thing that I struggle with, so I'm not going to get into details, but like an example from today, again, I got some news about some things that were happening with our department in terms of FTE and shuffling and nonsense that shouldn't be happening right before class was starting. Okay. And it was really hard for me to get my brain like focused around, okay, I'm in front of students who need something from me and I need to give them what they need. So like first, like I just acknowledged with them like, hey, I'm not going to tell you what's going on, but like just got some news related to teaching stuff at the school that's really frustrating to have learned about in this moment in time. I'm going to let the music play for another 2 minutes while I just like gather my wits, and then we'll get started. And the kids were like, okay, great, no problem. Got my wits together and launched into what we were doing for the day. And so what that reminds me to make sure that you and I talk about in this podcast, to those of you who are teachers who are listening, you will not make it through this job if you allow your task switching to be a constant repeat of the things about the job that you do not like. Because there are a lot of things about this job that are frustrating and irritating and in some cases infuriating. And in some cases we have control of those things, but a lot of the times we don't. And that in and of itself can be really frustrating. Like for me, at least, one of my primary sources of frustration is when you look at the Venn diagram of things that matter and the things that I can control, the things that matter that I don't have control over is a much larger circle than I would like it to be, right? That is a significant source of frustration for me. I'm a systems thinker, and that's part of that issue for myself. I don't want to put that on everybody else. And if you want to make it long-term through this job and continue to serve your students and focus on connections and being a student-first teacher, you need to do your best to, whenever possible, refocus on the things that you love about this job and put your energy into those tasks.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of a soapbox, but I just think that's one of those things that, like, if you want to make it through this job, you absolutely don't get distracted by the district trainings and all the, like, the peripheral stuff. Like, check the boxes that you need to check so that you can keep being present for your students, and then just always bring your task back to, how can I best serve my students today? And you're not always going to be your best, but
yeah. Well, and I love that because you're literally piggybacking on last week's concept of avoiding the negative, like self-talk. Because if I am going to task switch quickly into the crap I hate about this job, the things that are frustrating, like that has 3 to 5 times impact on me focusing on all the things I love. And so that is a spot where we need to not multitask and do the garbage while we do the good. It's no, knock out the garbage, flush the garbage, and then get back into the good, or at least back to neutral, like we talked about last week, so that we can show up the best we can for our students and be like, okay, this is something I have to do, and I'm not going to keep coming back to it in bits and pieces because it's just going to keep frustrating me every time I get off of what I should be doing to hit this little thing. And so let's just knock that out. Like, we had to do, I don't know, it was probably like a 20-minute survey on our way out the door yesterday. Yesterday was my last day of class. Well, no, actually, it wasn't even the last day of class. Teachers' last day. Students was our last day on Friday last week. We had like our closing day stuff, and then we had to get our grades in and do all of our checkout stuff, right? Well, part of it was an equity survey that took like 20 minutes, and all of us are just trying to get to summer break. And, like the internet was tweaking at moments. And so like we couldn't even do the survey half the time. And so, you could hear everybody's kind of like, meh, 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 meh. It's like, no, just sit down, focus on that. Once you're done, now go down, get your free food, hang out with your teachers you really like, make sure your grades are checked off, and then go home and enjoy summer. So no, I 100% agree with you. As teachers, if we keep task switching into the stuff that frustrates us, it will become overwhelming. And to the best of our ability, I would love to see all of us do a little Tim Ferriss 4-hour work week with it, right? Like, I'm not looking at my email all day. I'll look at it during my planning period and at the end of school. If you need me emergency, you call my classroom. I'm not looking at your email 17 times during my lessons, right? Like, that's something I've never done. And that's a perfect example of, I can't teach this lesson if I'm always constantly getting yanked by all the emails that are constantly getting flooded into my inbox that demand my attention now because it's an emergency. It's like, is it?
No, because if it wasn't, like, to your point, and I'm totally guilty of falling into that trap for sure, there's a lot of quote unquote feeling attacked right now by what you just said.
Coming for you, Dave.
But in a good way, like that's like, that's the check-in that I need in terms of someone holding me accountable. And like, if it was a legit emergency, somebody would call you.
Right. I'll pick up my phone if it rings, but I'm not going to respond to your email.
What an email communicates implicitly is get to it when you can get to it.
Right. And that's
the implicit communication of sending an email in the first place is, you take care of this when it's convenient for yourself.
Yeah, and again, in a world where we have created this false deadline world of like, you need to do this now, and it's like, you just forgot about something on your own timeline schedule, and so now you need me to do it in front of all the other stuff that has been lined up by people who properly planned and like got my attention a week ago. No, I'm sorry. You're going to wait till the end of the day, and I will respond to it before I go home. And once I go home, I will not look at your response until I get back tomorrow. Now, and I will respond to student emails and things like that, but a lot of times I will not respond to faculty emails until I'm in those designated windows. But again, that's, to me, I justify that because I'm like, oh, I'm a student-based teacher, right? I'm going to be here for the students. But even them, sometimes I'm like, don't be mad if I don't respond to you at 8 p.m. Like, your crisis of waiting to do the assignment to the last second does not demand me to pull away from my wife and my dogs tonight. Like, deal with it.
Yeah, there's one funny thing to comment on that, and then I'm trying so hard to not just unleash on. I told you guys that my admin pissed me off today, so I'm trying not to just like go completely on a 45-minute tangent. So the funny thing is, I saw a great tweet the other day that was like a Friday 3 p.m. email is a Monday issue.
Yes.
So much agreement with that statement based on what you were just saying, reminded me of that. And then I'm just going to, if anyone from PPS is listening, don't expect me to respond to an emergency that you created because you weren't keeping track of your own timelines and schedules for when things needed to be important. And I'll just leave it at that.
Brendan Bouchard has this brilliant podcast where he talks about this idea of false deadlines and real deadlines. And he goes, and I've gotten in fights with my wife about this. There are things that are important that we have agreed upon. And then when the week actually happens, all of a sudden it's like, oh, we need to do this. And he's like, we don't need to do and he's like, people get mad at me because I hold my boundaries, and like, this is stuff that we've already planned for a week or a month in advance, and then you're going to show up out of nowhere and hit me with like this emergency. Okay, tell me, when is I believe, if I get his phrasing correct, it says, when is the last date, drop dead date, where somebody's life or job or health is at risk if I don't complete this task? Okay, I'll have it done by then. And so it's this idea to get away from oh, I need it now. It's like, do you really need it now? Oh no, the deadline's actually due in a month. Perfect. I'll get it by that date, right? Now we'll plan out. You don't need me today, right now, ripping my attention, making me do my task switching and getting me out of flow and all that kind of stuff. So
yes, just with the only way to end that quickly is to just say I agree with you.
Yes.
That's where I'm going to go off. So.
Well, at the risk of having you go on a tangent, I'd love to hear your story. Hey guys, interrupting real quick here before K-Dub gets us into story time. Would love to remind you to jump on littlebiged.com, join that mailer list so that you can have access to all of our free resources. If you want access to all of our content, including some lesson plans and things, please join the Teacher Vault as well. And excited to close out our first season here with K-Dub's story. So let's get back to it.
So luckily, my story has nothing to do with anything that's happening in my current teaching life. My story is this week about the reward that you can see when you do put guardrails in place for your students to disengage from the multitasking, or the task switching, as we've been referring to it. And I'm going to focus specifically with my story. It's a football story. Which feels appropriate, right? Our very first podcast, we talked about Johnny Kalmar and it being bigger than the fart. We're gonna finish this podcast, which is the last one, with a little break here for summer, with the idea of connecting things back to football again. So, as a head football coach, I have every year taken my team to summer team camp, which is like, for the uninitiated, is taking your team or going with your teammates and fellow coaches to a college campus, ideally several hours away from home. In our case, the last few years, like literally 7 hours away from home. It's a long bus ride to Eastern Oregon University. Shout out to Coach Tim Camp. And the purpose of that is multifold, right? Like there's the very football intentional. We're going to practice multiple times a day. We're going to get a lot of work in. All of that stuff is very important. And if that's all it was about, I wouldn't worry about paying the money to go to camp, right? The reason that we invest like the most significant amount of dollars that we invest in anything, in making sure that every single kid can get this experience, is the time with teammates. That is the focus. There's intentional culture building things that we do. We do like a root beer float night where we talk about team goals for the year that I stole straight from Coach Boehner. There's another activity that I stole called Let It Burn, that you can't always do because there's often burn bans in effect in the middle of the summer. But it's a very powerful activity where you have students and or athletes talk about something that they've been carrying with them, and then they throw a stick into the fire and say "Let it burn" is like the symbol of like letting that thing go and moving on with other things that you need to move on with. We're not letting that thing hold you back anymore. Like letter campaigns where we have kids read letters from parents. There's all of this really important stuff that happens where the focus is human connection. And one of the things that we started doing several years ago is actively taking cell phones away from kids. So we would communicate weeks in advance with parents and players, do not bring your device. Like, you do not need a computer and you do not need a cell phone. Like, there's no reason to have either one of those things at the camp because everything is self-contained. We will shoot you an email, post it on Facebook, post it on Twitter when the bus is coming back to school so that you know when to pick up your kid. We'll post like daily like videos and like summaries of camp so that you know how things are going. But you do not need to talk to your child while they are with us. We have them under our care. And we don't want them using their device to get to create that invisible wall that goes up between kids when they're all on the couch looking at their phones, not interacting with one another. So invariably, we still have X amount of kids who will bring their device with them, and they think that they really need it for whatever reason. And to be totally fair, like the most common reason is, Coach, if my girlfriend doesn't hear from me every night, like, not good. Like, she doesn't understand that we're at a college campus and there's no college students here. Like, all right, whatever, cool. So we will take devices away. If we see them, we'll remove them. Most of the kids are pretty good at honoring, just like once we established it, like the norm of, if you bring your phone, you're going to give it to the coaches. We're going to put it in this drawer, and that's where it's going to stay. And then there's we give them a 45-minute window before lights out where they're allowed to come get their phones, and then they have to give it back. So I'm giving all of those details to explain like what the activity is and like why we take their phones away, which gets to the big point. Those kids that I just talked about, like, so like the last year that we went, I think we brought 42 kids with us to camp. I think 7 kids decided to bring their devices despite all of our recommendations to the contrary. I already called out Cole. So of those 7 kids, I think only one by the third night, we're there for 4 nights. By the third night, all but one of them was no longer coming to get their phone. And then in the conversations with kids, both overhearing things on the way home, overhearing conversations over meals that are happening in the dining area, or like literal direct feedback from athletes, they love not having their phones, right? And they can quickly identify the power of being able to just connect with the guys that are on their team, and having that time where they're not able to find the comfortable distraction, and they're forced to work through the discomfort of figuring out what to talk about, or what do we have in common, or how are we going to entertain ourselves. And honestly, you know, they're kids. They sometimes make decisions about entertaining themselves that we wish they wouldn't, that they probably wouldn't make if they had their cell phones. But all that whole experience is so rich for them, and they remember it. At the end of every season, we do an exit survey with our players about what was their favorite thing about the entire season. And every single year that I've been a head coach, granted, we didn't win as many games as I would like to, so that might impact some of the feedback that we got. But when we ask the players what their favorite part of the season was, it's always team camp. And invariably, when we ask them to explain what they loved about team camp, the lack of access to a device is always one of the most common things that is talked about. So I know it's hard. I know that you're going to get pushback. I know that it's going to be uncomfortable for you as a person in charge of young people, but any opportunity where you can force kids to get rid of the device and focus on the actual eye-to-eye contact and human connection with the other kids, they will appreciate you for it. So that is my story, is that when you can eliminate that distraction, that task switching, multitasking device, the kids will actually appreciate you for it. And it's really hard because they're going to be angry at you at the beginning, but ultimately the full circle is that they're going to love you for it eventually.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's one of those that can apply to our classrooms. It can apply to our relationships and putting phones away during dinner, like all those kinds of things. And I love the example of camp, and obviously, you know, playing with you in high school, like that's like, I'll always remember Western. You know, like, and then like when you and I were coaching, like Camp Brotherhood, like those are things that are lifelong memories, because we weren't task switching and we were very present with our squad, you know, like just awesome. So thank you so much for sharing that. Appreciate it. And I think this is going to close us down for the summer. So like big giant shout out to everybody who's been with us. Shout out to those of you who are going to find us in 6 years down the road and listen to season 1 anyways. And we're excited to come back with more material and new stuff as we relaunch at the end of summer here. But have a wonderful summer break. We love you all, and always learn in a peak state.
Make it a great day.